All right. Thank you for that. Well, I have a talk today. Yeah, but in a second. I have a talk that I've entitled, hey, wait, don't leave yet. I've entitled The Most Terrible Mountains, and the scripture that goes along with that happens to be part of the story. And I forgot to ask somebody to read it. I wish there was a group that knew it. Oh, you're going to read it. Okay. Perfect. It's going to be scripture. I forgot all about asking somebody. Joshua, huh? What was that? Oh, okay. Okay, here we go. First time. Be strong, good courage. Be not afraid, be thou with the Lord. How about a test? How about you guys back there say it out loud from memory? Okay, then do the one before it then. From memory. Don't look, you gotta do it from memory. Then this, oh well, and that. Thank you all. Okay. I'm going to hit you with a bummer of a thought here first. Of all the people that leave the church, and when I say church, I'm going to be saying the church. This is that invisible thing that encompasses believers from all walks. So, the church, of those that leave the church, 63.5% of them are under the age of 30. Yeah, young, it says young adult. I'm saying 30 because that's the number that kind of popped in my head. It didn't actually say. It said young adults comprise 63.5% of all those that leave the church. That's a shame. If you will remember with me, or think about history a little bit, back when our founding fathers, and shortly after, and actually in Europe before that, when the founding fathers of a town would lay out a town, they would start with the town square. They would place a courthouse, a library, and a church. That's just the way it was. And that's the way it was for what historians say was about 1,700 years, a period of time that sociologists would call Christendom. And I'm afraid we are post-Christendom. Am I right? Is that safe to say? We are post-Christendom. If you didn't go to church in that period of time, somebody would probably say something to you at work the next week. Where were you? It was just a given. People went to church in this period of time called Christendom. Now, being post-Christendom, I don't think anybody asks anybody if they went to church or where were you or anything like that. It's not part of our mindset, especially the young mindset in faith. But all of us, obviously. Here's another sobering thought. Pastors throughout all of church are leaving ministry in alarming numbers, record numbers and alarming numbers. Now, I'm not to say that new ones aren't coming in and taking their place to a degree, but pastors are leaving out of frustration. The frustration is that 1,500 a month in the United States are leaving the ministry. Because, in their words, the most common reason cited was they're worn down trying to move things forward. They're trying to move a block forward that won't move. And a lot of them say, actually just one of them, but I think it's indicative, said to the person taking the survey, they said, they did not train us for this assignment. What we're encountering right now, the paradigm that we're dealing with in church, in Christendom, there were a lot of things done right. We've done evangelistic series, which have been greatly successful. Yeah, and I'm not saying they're not going to be in the future. Just they happen to be less so now. We've handed out, sold literature, and done seminars on health, finance, marriage. We've done healing, like Ancient Paths. And I know that churches have done things that they've labeled different but same. And I put it to you, I'm going to parallel our moment in history with the journeys of Lewis and Clark. I'm a fan of Lewis and Clark, and I've read and studied them a lot, actually. We have an aunt who wrote the book for Discovery, the journeys of Lewis and Clark. And in this book, it was simply the most pertinent journal entry from every day of the journey. That's all it was. And it's a great read. Misspelling and all. She didn't correct spelling or grammar. So, Lewis and Clark, like the church, had a course mapped out for them that they were pretty familiar with. And they started up in Mississippi and then in Missouri and then kept climbing up toward the Great Divide, and it was getting smaller and smaller. They left behind their keel boats at some point, I'm not sure where, probably somewhere in Missouri, in Montana, I guess, and switched to just canoes. They kept trudging up the slopes of the Great Divide until the canoes were no longer viable. But in their thinking, they were going to get to the top of the Great Divide, they were going to switch rivers and coast down to the Pacific. So they took their canoes to the top of the Great Divide. Loved these, and they aren't light like the ones we have now. They lugged their canoes to the top of the Great Divide, got there, and were a bit stunned, to say the least. The world view was, it shocked them. One of the crew members in a journal entry said, "Never have we seen such terrible mountains," as they looked toward the Pacific. They thought, because the map stopped at the Great Divide, there had been no person of European descent that had made it further than that from west in this manifest distance. So the map stopped. So they're at a point now, they are off the map. There's no map. I don't know if I like that term, but it's a good one. They were off the map. We are off the map in the church now. As we move forward, I would say to a large degree, we're going off map. We want to reach a generation that's not being reached. There's no plan in place that is working. To varying degrees, yes, in some churches, and even our own, we've had programs that work and to a degree, but I still think we are largely off the map. In Sabbath school, someone said after Jesus left, the disciples all came together. And it was said to regroup. It's time to regroup. And I thought that's a good picture. But in the regrouping, I want us to have the picture in our mind and of ourselves that, yes, we need to adapt and move forward, but let's do it in a spirit of adventure. Because who doesn't like adventure, right? We're going to learn as we go, and we are entering and have entered uncharted territory. It's important, obviously, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I like reading various authors from a variety of backgrounds. And you don't always agree, and that's okay. But never throw out, if there's a gem in there, I'm going to read the whole book for it. That's not morally true. Somebody gave me a book recently, and I didn't think it was. Ended up being more junk. I just couldn't get through it. We need to trust those leaders that have brought us safe so far. They've brought us this far, safely so far. We can say that about our churches. We can say that about the leadership in those churches. But in general, they've brought us safe so far. So we need to continue to trust them, and we need to encourage them to adapt along with us and make an adventure out of moving forward. And this moving forward is all in my mind anyway. And the gist of this moving forward is an attempt to re-engage a generation that is disengaged. And all of us can fit that description to a degree at times, to one degree or another, and at various times in our life. But in general, I'm talking about the young adult down through the teens that have disengaged and find no use in what we're doing. And it's sad but true. And I'm talking generalities, so I'm not talking all of them, because we have good, strong, young people in the church now. There's a great quote. We have nothing to fear for the future, except where the Lord has led us in the past. That's why history is so crucial to our experience. We need to know our history. And that gives us assurance that God has led up till now. There's no reason to think that he won't lead us through all the way to the Pacific. I like reading about revivals, and there's been a number of them throughout history, obviously. So we think of Martin Luther comes to mind first, right? He was 34 years old when he nailed the 95 Theses to the chapel. What chapel was that? You know? What was it? Yeah, that's right. 34 years old. John Calvin had realized that the things that he was learning in church, he didn't agree with him. He left that church at age 21. At 27, he was instrumental in a movement of reform and started printing a paper that was called the Institutes. At 27, John Huss was 33 when he began to oppose the status quo of the time, and then going to stake a foot forward. The interesting thing about him is he was so led by the Spirit at the time, he sang through his entire burning life. He sang songs, and the people heard him. Ellen White who were instrumental in beginning this church, was only 17. And she's been labeled by the Smithsonian Institute as among the 100 most influential Americans. There's a movie out right now. It's a good movie called The Jesus Revolution. And in the 70s, young people weren't happy with the status quo. A man named Greg Laurie, which I've listened to in general, but I didn't know this about his history. And other young people, very young people, started to do church differently. They baptized thousands of young people because they stepped out to do things differently. So, my heart is for a generation that I believe will be the generation to see us through to Christ's kingdom. I'm not saying this one, I'm saying young people that I think listen to. Young people will be the generation that leads in the final movements. I'm pretty certain of that. There's probably scriptural support for that. I didn't come across it. The way I see it, we have three choices. One is to do nothing and coast on past success. And we've had a lot of past success, and I think those same methods will see success in the future. So I'm not saying out with the old and with the new, nothing like that. I'm saying let's add to past success with current, in the view of current reality, with current methods. I don't know what those are, I'm afraid. Because we have nothing to fear for the future except the way God has led us in the past. Is God going to lead into future success and reveal the way? But I want us to open our mind to in the spirit of adventure to those realities. And when we're presented with an idea that might carry forward better than what we've done, that we don't close the door on it. Second, we could always throw up our hands and give up. That would be an option, right? Or third, we adapt to a changing world. Radically if necessary. And we adopt a spirit of adventure and a mindset that God, I'm open to whatever it is you have in mind for us as a church and leaders in the church to move forward in a way that's going to be more inviting to the generation that we're after. I picture Lewis and Clark standing on the Great Divide with their War of Discovery group. Up to that point, they thought they had had it rough and increasingly hard. Granted, they had encountered wild animals and they talked about mosquitoes constantly. So that was one of their big things. They were starved at times. They were lost at times. It took them almost a full month to get around one waterfall. And it took them 15 months to get from wherever they left on the Mississippi up to the Great Divide. Is where they started. Oh, okay. Falls from there. So I kind of picture them all standing there, and they followed the Missouri up to a spring, basically. And at one point, Lewis was standing with the food on either side. And I wish I'd written down a quote and said something profound. Anyway. And then they made their way up to the peak, to the summit, expecting, like I said before, to see the downhill slide into the Pacific, just to see mountain after mountain after mountain after mountain. And the map that they had stopped at the Great Divide because nobody had been that far. So they were lost, discouraged. They had no idea how to get there from here. And then And it's speculated that they actually would have failed ultimately had they not had a young person come along, a young mom, and lead them. Sacagawea. She led them the rest of the way. Without that young person filling that role, it's speculated that they may very well have turned back. There's a quote, and it says, "Conceptually stuck systems cannot become unstuck simply by trying." I come from a family that's guilty of trying hard at every turn. Right? Yeah. When things get tough, we try harder. And it's a good thing to be ambitious, but it's also a good thing to be just lazy enough to look for a better way. My family may be guilty of not being lazy enough to look for a better way. In a lot of instances, so it's just true. But let's take a moment, take a deep breath, and look for a better way. There's nothing wrong with that. Work smarter, not harder, right? I was thinking, you know what? After at the summit there, they realized we can't take our canoes. Canoes aren't land. They abandoned the boats, packed up everything, and set out on foot. Now, eventually, we got to a point where they realized they got to the Snake River, we can build canoes, and then they canoed the rest of the way down to the Columbia and then on out to the ocean. But by the time they made it over the mountains, they kind of landed in a place called Mussel Shell Meadows in Oregon. That's where the Nez Perce were friendly to them and gave them food. They were at the point of starvation. But I like this quoting this verse in Romans 12:2. It says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed." I know we've all had transformational experiences. Who we wouldn't be? That's the simple truth. But the transformational experience we're talking about now is looking for, praying for, asking for, and adopting ways to move forward. It's going to be more effective in reaching our young people. I was thinking about how many movies I've watched in my life where the script is so similar that there must be a common theme in the psychology of man to write this script. This young person from the city, spoiled rotten, goes to their grandparents' house and hates it. Just hates it, and goes kicking and screaming until the adventure begins with the grandparents. And then they come to life. And I think that psychology, I think, carries over into, that's a microcosm of us human. That when we adopt the spirit of adventure and realize that this is God leading, whatever it is, however let's move forward, that God is leading, and we get to be part of that. And we see young people coming on board, supplying the energy to carry it forward. We see the older supplying the wisdom, and we see the church as a whole working together. It's an exciting time to be looking forward to. I believe. I'm ahead of my notes, but I want to end with a quote that it's one of my favorite quotes. Again, it says, "There will be a revival of primitive godliness as has not been seen since apostolic times." So I'm going to take that quote as a promise that this is going to happen. Okay, if that's a promise, it is going to happen, then it's also a promise that the means for that revival within this supply. I happen to believe it's going to be people younger than me that are going to be most instrumental in that. And the reason I believe that is because that's the way it's been so far at every revival. I mean, you have some of the sages that were like in a constant state of revival, like Billy Graham, that their life was a life of leading revival. But I believe that these last day movements will be largely carried forward by a younger generation. That's my thing. That's my hope. Actually, that's my hope. So, if you'll pray with me. Heavenly Father, we are very grateful. We're grateful for so many promises about the way you've led in the past. And we have nothing to fear, because you will lead us through the end. It's just a fact. Help us to be open and receptive to the means by which you do that. And we've seen time and again that your disciples had one thing in mind, just to have a paradigm shift and realize it was something totally different, as in the way of kingdom. Help us not to be that, Lord. We know we have been, and we probably will be, and we ask forgiveness in advance, and forgiveness for the past. But as we move forward, God, open us up, and fill us with your Holy Spirit that allows us to see, give us eyes, have something like scales fall from our eyes if we are indeed blind and don't realize it. We are giving you permission right now, Lord, have that fall from our eyes like you did for Paul, that he could see clearly. Help us to see clearly. It's our prayer in the name of Jesus.